Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel has continued its barrage expanding military on Gaza City with the goal of sieging the city entirely. As reports from Gaza Health Minister says 60 Palestinians have been killed, and as Hamas continues to warn that the Israeli hostages' lives are at risk. US President Donald Trump is to return to the United Nations General Assembly next week, headlining its 80th session. Meanwhile, UN Chief Antonio Guterres warned of widening geopolitical divides as nearly 150 heads of state gather, while Trump, who has cut US funding to UNRWA, UNESCO and WHO, is also expected to attend. US President Donald Trump has warned that bad things will happen if Afghanistan does not return control of the strategic Bagram air base to the United States, declining to rule out a new troop deployment, the base which was abandoned during the 2021 US withdrawal, as Afghan officials reject the idea of a renewed American presence. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has organized a day of military training for civilians amid new threats from US President Donald Trump and a massive American naval deployment of 7 ships, F-35 fighter jets, as well as nuclear submarine in the Caribbean. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez has accused Washington of waging an undeclared war. President Donald Trump has announced a new plan to impose a $100,000 annual fee on H-1B visas, a move that could severely impact the U.S. tech industry. Major companies, including Microsoft and JP Morgan, have warned visa holders to stay in the U.S. or return quickly, according to media reports. A US-China agreement will give ByteDance just one of 7 board seats in TikTok's new US entity, with Americans holding the other 6, while control of the app's algorithm will not be under ByteDance, while President Donald Trump is facing a deadline set by Congress to shut down the app in US unless sold, is pushing this deal to preserve TikTok's access to its 170 million US users. A cyber attack on software has disrupted check-in and boarding systems since yesterday at major European airports, including London Heathrow, Brussels, Berlin, Dublin, and Cork, causing 29 flight cancellations and widespread delays. The software company has warned impacts would stretch into Sunday, according to media reports. Guinea will hold a constitutional referendum today, 4 years after the military seized power. This comes as Guinea paves the way for future elections while allowing junta leader Mamadi Doumbouya to run for president. The crucial vote is being boycotted by opposition parties, according to media reports. According to Gaza's health ministry, Israel's military continues its assault on Gaza City, dismantling underground shafts and booby-trapped structures in a campaign that has claimed at least 60 Palestinian lives. The strikes targeting high-rise buildings in Gaza City comes amid growing international pressure. 10 countries, including Australia, Belgium, and Canada, are set to recognize a Palestinian state on Monday as the UN General Assembly convenes next week. Meanwhile, protests have erupted across Israel, with thousands calling for an end to the war in Gaza and a deal to secure the release of the hostages held by Hamas. These demonstrations come as Israel intensifies its military attacks to capture Gaza's largest urban center. Let's listen into what some of the residents have said.
אבל נתניהו סוגר את חלונות ביתו. אין מקום מספיק חם בגיהנום למנהיג הזה.
This war is a senseless political war, right? It was time to stop it, right? And I feel like there were so many chances, so many off-ramps that You know, they weren't missed. They were just like we barreled straight through. I don't have an expectation that's hopeful on that front. I hope that there'll be a fair and free election in Israel, and we'll be able to depose them that way. That's my hope, and I'm going to be out in the street until that happens.
But coming here and to see that you're not alone with the hope, like people that come here every week are people with hope, and hope that we can make the change.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, how might this recognition of a Palestinian state by multiple countries impact Israel's strategy in Gaza?
The interesting thing about your question is, up to now, and we've discussed this here on NewsX a number of times, the international criticism or actions by other countries doesn't seem to affect Netanyahu's strategy for how to conduct the war in Gaza, including the current operation in Gaza City. So if your question is limited to what these announcements by a number of countries, and granted they are important countries, important economic, diplomatic, and military countries from Europe, but will their announcements in the coming days at the UN General Assembly meeting change how Israel or Netanyahu conducts the war in the coming days and weeks? The answer to that question is probably no.
And do you think this, even though we are pessimistic about this, can this finally shift anything in a meaningful way?
The only shifts here are going to be if there's a ceasefire, and it's obviously proving very difficult to get the two sides, the Israeli government and Hamas, to agree to the terms of a ceasefire. And as the war prolongs, Israel, and specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is the decision maker, Israel is reluctant to agree on any kind of short-term ceasefire that allows Hamas to keep its weapons and remain in place. So for the Israeli government at the moment, a ceasefire means that Hamas has to lay down its weapons, and the Hamas fighters, need to either surrender or leave Gaza. And then the discussion about how to rebuild Gaza could begin. But you have to be pessimistic at the moment about any chances of a ceasefire. Again, Israel is moving into Gaza City as we speak. The recent events where Israel attacked a Hamas meeting in Qatar might make the Qataris reluctant, understandably, to play the mediator role that they have been playing so long. To their credit, that they've tried very hard to be the mediator in a ceasefire. So at the moment, unfortunately for the civilians who are going to be the victims, it looks like the war is going to continue.
Thank you very much, Ross, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, the United Kingdom and Portugal are expected to recognize Palestinian state ahead of leaders gathering at the United Nations. According to reports, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is expected to publish a statement confirming the UK's recognition of an independent Palestinian state, while simultaneously introducing new sanctions on Hamas. The Portuguese Foreign Ministry has also announced the recognition of the Palestinian state, and French President Emmanuel Macron is also moving ahead with the plans of recognizing Palestine at the UNGA summit. He had earlier stated that Israel's offensive to take control of Gaza and West Bank is a political move and is killing the possibility of two-state solution. Canada and Australia are preparing similar announcements. The leaders of Europe and Israel are set to meet on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Israel has criticized this move, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling it rewards terror. Now, for this discussion, we go back to Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, as the UN General Assembly convenes tomorrow, what role can it realistically play in influencing this course of conflict in Gaza?
Unfortunately for the UN, it just doesn't seem to have played much of a role. When we think about who's mediated the ceasefires or ceasefire negotiations over the past nearly 2 years. The key players have been the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the United States. The UN has just not played a role in that process. Of course, the UN has played a role in humanitarian aid for civilians, but there's been a lot of tension between the Israeli government and the United Nations aid agencies, lots of accusations back and forth, and a lot of ill will there, which is why the Israelis eventually teamed up with the United States to create an alternative platform to provide aid, which was also heavily criticized. But when it comes to what the UN can do, at least what the UN institutions can do, or what the UN meeting can accomplish, we know there's going to be a lot of criticism of Israel. Again, it won't change how Netanyahu conducts the war. It might cause some movement with regard to humanitarian aid. Israel has been a little sensitive to international criticism, and when there is that criticism, Israel is willing to increase the amount of aid that flows into Gaza. So it's possible that the meeting of so many countries in one place and their joint statements might prompt Israel to allow in more aid. But when it comes to stopping the war itself, I don't think that the UN General Assembly or the UN institutions are going to have any effect on that.
And do you think this, the growing wave of domestic protest in Israel, does that have any repercussions or effects on the military in Israel?
Clearly up to now, because there have been protests throughout the course of the war, but notably led by hostage families, and understandably, they want their loved ones to be returned safely. But those protests, as large as they sometimes are, it's similar to the international criticism. Netanyahu seems to be immune to it. As long as he can keep his coalition together, which is difficult, but he's done it up to now. As long as he can keep this coalition together, then he will stay in power. And until the coalition falls apart or this government runs its natural course to the next scheduled election, then he's going to stay in power. And even if his criminal cases catch up with him and the coalition stays in power, he'll be replaced by an equally or even a more conservative prime minister. So again, there'd have to be a collapse of the coalition for there to be significant change in Israel's policies.
Right. Thank you, Zaros, for joining us and sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now we move on to Middle East. In developments from the Middle East, an Israeli airstrike in southern Lebanon has killed one person, according to reports. The strike hit a car on Hardali Road in the Nabatieh district. The victim is reportedly a resident of Kiam town. This comes as the Israeli Air Forces continue carrying out heavy raids in South Lebanon, which have been condemned by the Lebanese army. The strikes could escalate the situation as Israel continues to maintain military presence at 5 border posts in South Lebanon. All those were supposed to be withdrawn by January of this year. Now we move on to Asia. Tens of thousands of Filipinos took to the streets in Philippines today, protesting over the alleged corruption in government flood control projects. Over 30,000 people gathered on Manila's historic EDS highway, with another 20,000 in other parts of the capital and cities nationwide. The protests followed President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s admission that some flood projects involved kickbacks. Organizers say people are suffering from floods while others enrich themselves. Marcos launched an independent inquiry, froze linked bank accounts, and saw his cousin resign amid the scandal. The president urges peace, but warns security forces will act if violence breaks out. Let's have a look at what some protesters have said.
People are very angry because they have been victims of flooding for all these years. And flooding has made their lives so difficult. And yet the discovery that all the billions of pesos that were supposed to help them, that was supposed to solve the problem, have ended up lining the pockets of all these corrupt politicians, government officials, and contractors. We are calling on government to hold to account everyone who is involved in that corruption. No sacred cows, no allies.
We are here to remind our people that during the anniversary of martial law, martial law was not just about authoritarian rule. Martial law enabled the plunder of our nation's wealth. Unfortunately, authoritarianism and plunder continue to plague our country. So we are here to demand action from the government. We are here to demand accountability against corrupt officials in the government.
Now we go back to Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much, Ross, for staying with us. Now looking at Philippines, is this current Marcos administration, what are the risks, political risks, does this administration face amid these large-scale protests and allegations of kickbacks?
Even if President Marcos himself is not involved in any corruption, the perception is that corruption has occurred recently during the 3 years that he's been in office. He took office in 2022. And then as far as the risk going forward, he could have a significantly weakened presidency in the remaining 3 years of his term. Now, Philippines does not allow running for a second term, so he's term limited to 1 term. So he doesn't have to worry about being reelected, but he does have to worry about very quickly becoming a weakened and lame duck president much earlier than he normally would. One would say he'd be a lame duck in the final year or so of his term. But if he's significantly damaged and it continues to be revealed that people close to him or government departments within his government were irresponsible in the spending and oversight of these public infrastructure projects, then it's going to significantly damage the remaining 3 years of his presidency.
And how might this controversy influence upcoming elections or policy priorities for Philippines?
Well, the interesting thing there is when you talk about policy priorities, of course, poverty alleviation programs are an important part of government spending in the Philippines, as is public works and infrastructure, which is the focus of the current scandal. But in recent years, under President Marcos' leadership, military spending, especially given the risk presented by China in the South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea, as they call it in the Philippines, has resulted in President Marcos advocating for significant increases in defense spending. Now, if he needs to regain popular support and make up for this current scandal, he's going to have to shift funds from defense spending back to social spending and public works, and that might hurt the modernization program that the Philippines military desperately needs.
Right, and in what ways could these protests impact the broader fight against corruption in the Philippines?
Unfortunately, this is a recurring cycle. So under his father, who was forcibly removed by public protest in 1986, there was an extraordinary amount of corruption. This is well documented. But unfortunately, in the decades after democratization in the Philippines, over the past nearly 40 years, there's also been terrible problems with corruption under all the presidents, and at the national government level, at the local government level. And this is a problem that unfortunately doesn't go away in the Philippines. And really, it's up to the politicians and the people of the Philippines to remedy this. It really is a problem that they have to fix if their country is ever going to move forward, whether economically or by other measurements.
Thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us and sharing your insight as a political analyst. Now we move on to our next news. UK fighter jets have conducted their first NATO air defense mission over Poland as part of NATO's Eastern Sentry operation. This comes in response to a recent Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace. 2 British Royal Air Force Typhoons were deployed to patrol Polish skies, reinforcing NATO's defense capabilities along its eastern flank. This move signals a strong commitment to defending NATO's airspace following what was described as the most significant violation of airspace by Russia since its invasion of Ukraine. The UK government has emphasized its readiness to project air power as tensions rise in Europe and will focus on increasing defense spending. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, how could this recent Russian drone and jet incursions influence the security dynamics in NATO's eastern borders?
Defense capability rely on the will and the capability. So that's why, view from Russia want to know the strength of the NATO by checking of the capability by the textbook, but will rely on the real activity. So that's why recently Russia's incursion is one kind of the test for the NATO's will, which is drone enter the 19 drones enter the Poland, Romania, and Russian fighter just also enter the Estonia more than 20 minutes. So that's why this is a test, and Russia want to check the will of the NATO countries. So showing the will is needed, and in this case, France and British try to deploy the fighter jet to show their will to defend the border. In this case, a little interesting fact is, if Russia really afraid the NATO capability, Russia do not provoke like that. So that's why the view from this, Russia does not worry about NATO, even if the expanding NATO is the reason to invade Ukraine. At least Russia says this is the reason. But despite this, Russia does not worry about NATO's capability. So view from NATO, what kind of the strong will NATO can show? There are some options. Firstly, if the Russia enter the NATO countries' territorial area, of course, shooting down the plane is one of the answer. In case of the Poland, when the Russian drone enter, they have already shoot down the 3 or 4 Russian drones. But if in case of Estonia, the Russian fighter jet with pilot enter the NATO's airspace, will they shooting down? This is one of the matter. In the past, the Turkey shooting down Russia's fighter, that time the pilot was dead. So that's why it will be more escalated situation. So that's why NATO need to show the strong will, but what kind of level is matter. And will United States move, or what, or how much European country can share the security burden to defend the border, and showing the strong will is also matter. So that is controversial, and NATO need to prove their strong bond and strong will in front of Russia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, looking at South America, Argentine President Javier Milei is set to meet with the United States President Donald Trump in New York on Tuesday as part of his U.S. trip to attend the United Nations General Assembly, says the Argentine Presidential Press Office. On the sidelines of the UN gathering, Milei will also hold talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Argentine leader has maintained a foreign policy closely aligned with both the United States and Israel, and has reaffirmed this week that his country will open an embassy in Jerusalem next year. Ahead of the high-profile meetings, Milei will be joined today by his Foreign Minister Gerardo Verdeguin and Economy Minister Luis Caputo to hold talks with IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva. Now for this discussion, we go back to Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you, Doctor, for staying with us. Now, how might President Javier's close alignment with the US and Israel influence Argentina's role? And also, could this shift affect Argentina's relationship with other Latin American countries?
Influence is a little bit limited because all of the leaders say their country first policy. It is interesting when they say their policy should be their country first policy. Despite so, this looks like an anti-global movement. Despite this, they are global now. So the right-wing politicians try to collaborate each other, and everyone says their country first. So that is a new move in the new trend in the world politics now. So ally of the right-wing parties, ally of the right-wing politicians show the strong influence in many countries in the world. And so right or left is a matter of their policy, foreign policy. So in this case, America first, Argentina first, and Netanyahu did not say Israel first, I think, but at the same time, the policies looks like Israel first. So that's why they share the same philosophy, same idea, and they are ally. And that is the image they want to advertise. And so now the other countries in Europe or Japan or other countries, right or left is matter. In case of the Latin America, America focusing on Latin America or American continent itself from the Greenland to the southern tip of the South American continent. So that's why showing the strong loyalty to the United States or strong collaboration stance with the United States is indeed beneficial between Argentina and the U.S. policy in this case. So as a Latin America country sees what happened between US and Argentina, and they will decide, will they show the strong bond with the United States? In this case, should we say the right wing? That is image they are checking now, I think.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru Nagao, for always joining us and sharing your insight from Japan. Now we move on to our next news. According to Qatar's administrative office reports, Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamam bin Hamad Al Thani has left for New York to participate in the United Nations General Assembly. The 80th session of the UN General Assembly comes as the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip approaches nearly 2 years. Moreover, Global Hunger Monitor has warned that famine has taken hold in Gaza and is likely to spread by the end of the month. This assembly also comes in the backdrop of escalating regional tensions following an Israeli airstrike on September 9th in Qatar's capital city, Doha. The IDF has claimed that the strike targeted Hamas leaders meeting in a Qatari government complex and also killed and injured Hamas members, Qatari security personnel, as well as civilians. This marked Israel's first direct strike on a Gulf Cooperation Council member, raising security concerns for Qatar and other GCC states. Now we move on to North America. More than 100,000 mourners from across U.S., including the U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, are expected to pack an NFL stadium just outside Phoenix and an overflow arena next door to honor the deceased conservative activist Charlie Kirk at a heavily secured memorial. The memorial is being held at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, home to the Arizona Cardinals, which can fit more than 70,000 people, but organizers with Turning Point were expecting such a crush that they set aside a 19,000-person arena next door, where the Phoenix hockey team once played, for overflow crowds, and they said that they were also planning a second overflow location. Meanwhile, an armed man named Joshua Runkles, accused of bringing a gun and a knife, has been arrested inside the State Farm Stadium at the memorial. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.